So about a few months ago, I went ahead and finished playing Persona 4, specifically Persona 4 Golden. And now that some time has passed since I first played it, I gotta say that this has ended up being one of my favorite games of all time. And with the remake literally just getting announced at the time of this recording, I thought now would be an appropriate time to talk about my experience playing the game for the first time. Now for context, this was my first ever Persona game. I know a lot of people started off with Persona 5, and some even with the Persona 3 games. But me on the other hand, I went ahead and chose 4 to be my introduction to the series. Perhaps because it was the cheapest in the PlayStation Store. Now currently I'm playing Reload, so I may make a video on that once I'm done, and maybe even some point in the future I could do one for 5. Anyways though, before playing this game, aside from a few characters in Persona 5, I really only knew like 3 things about the Persona games. 1, that it was a spin-off of another franchise called Shin Megami Tensei. 2, that the music in this series goes absolutely hard. And 3, that the main abilities were pretty much just stands from JoJo's. And I knew damn well from that point I was gonna probably enjoy these games. Now before I get to talking about my journey through Persona 4, I had no clue what I was doing for like the first couple months of this game. Also, I lost quite a bit of my footage from the playthrough, so please bear with me. Anyways though, with that being said, it is now time to finally go through my Persona 4 Golden experience. Yes, that's what I'm titling the video. So without further ado, let's get it! Okay, so the game starts off with us in this limo and we get introduced to this guy named Igor. Now, I didn't know until much later into playing that Igor was in every Persona game, and in each one he has a different assistant. For this game, it's Margaret. He said a bunch of stuff that I didn't fully understand my first time playing, but really he was foreshadowing things that would take place in the game. Anyways though, we cut to our main character, Yuno Arakami, who's on his way to a small town named Inaba. There he will attend school and stay with his uncle Dojima for 1 year. Once we make it over to the train station there, we meet up with him as well as his daughter Nanako, who we will be protecting at all costs, by the way. Now at the train station, we meet another character named Marie. Marie is an interesting case because she becomes a lot more important later on in this game, but also because she wasn't in the original Persona 4 game and is only in Golden. Moving on though, we step into the rest of Inaba and we visit the gas station. We talk to one of the gas station employees and this happens. Trust me, this will be important much later on into the game. After this though, we get to walk around town and actually get our first bit of real gameplay. And here's also where I got my first taste of just how good the music in this game would be with Heartbeat Heartbreak. Even after being done with the game, this is still one of my favorite tracks. I even put it in my playlist, and yes, I will be blasting it in the car. Anyways though, the next day is our first day at Yasagami High. This is when we meet some of the other main cast members like Yosuke, Chie, and Yukiko, as well as our lame ass homeroom teacher, Mr. Moro. Even after playing, I still have beef with this man. Yosuke is another kid from the city who moved to this town somewhat recently. Chie does martial arts and is always talking about food. And Yukiko is Chie's best friend. Her family also owns a hotel called the Amagi Inn. I should also mention that Chie and Yukiko cannot cook for shit. This becomes an ongoing gag within the game. These guys help us get more comfortable in the town and give us a sense of belonging. Within the first few months of the game, I honestly got pretty attached to the main cast. And looking back, I think their dynamics were written so well. This becomes more and more of the case as we gain new members of the group, as well as doing their social links. Speaking of which, I low-key fumbled the bag when it came to them. I think by the end of the game, I ended up finishing like 8 or 9 altogether. Granted, this is my first Persona game, and again, I had no clue what I was doing for like the first couple months. But thankfully, I managed to max out most of the main cast social links before it was too late, each of which I thoroughly enjoyed. I also really liked a lot of the other social links outside of the main cast. Nanako and Dojima as being some of my favorites, for example. Moving away from the characters though, I of course have to mention how we even awaken our personas in the first place. So basically there's this mysterious TV program called the Midnight Channel, and it's sort of been the talk of the town. Narukami watches it one night and finds out he can actually go inside of it. Eventually him, Yosuke, and Chie venture in there, and this is when him and Yosuke awaken their personas. This is also where we meet the next member of our team, Teddy. Teddy's an interesting character. For most of the main story, there's a huge mystery as to just what he is, which we do find out eventually, but really when it comes to his character, I ain't gonna lie, he's pretty annoying. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I don't dislike him as much as other people, but he can definitely be a pest sometimes, and is also a bit of a perv. He gives each of us these glasses so we can see better in this world since it's covered in fog. But anyways, the Midnight Channel is also important because it's connected to the main mystery of the series, being the murders and kidnappings of different characters. With the first one being a news reporter named Mayuki Yamano. We actually see the police at the crime scene after our first day of school, and not too long after this we get our second victim, Saki Konishi. She's a third year Yasugami High and also Yosuke's senpai. We also get introduced to Adachi, one of the detectives on the case. He's also sort of like Dojima's right-hand man. When we go into the TV with Yosuke and Chie, we find clues that relate to both of the murders, and they try to start piecing together how the victims may have died. But while trying to do so, Yukiko ends up getting kidnapped by the killer and thrown into the TV, and we must go in there to save her. This is basically how each rescue mission of the game plays out. Character shows up on the Midnight Channel, eventually gets kidnapped. We go into the TV and enter the dungeon, fight against these entities called shadows, and eventually make it to the top where we fight the boss. Most of which are just shadow versions of the person who got kidnapped. Once we save them, they gain their own persona and join the team. Now for Yukiko's shadow fight, it was a bit difficult for me. I was a bit underleveled and I didn't know it was weak to electricity the first time, but eventually I did defeat it. Though I did almost run out of time to do so. Like, I was literally off by 2 days. I guess I should mention that if you don't save a character within a certain time span, then it results in a game over. Luckily, this didn't happen to me at all during my playthrough. Now, after each rescue mission, we get a bit of time to go around Inaba and explore the town, as well as work on our social links. I'd go ahead and join the school's basketball team and eventually the theater club, both of which can improve your social stats, which is something else I didn't really take advantage of. I'd say even more so than the social links, because it would actually prevent me from doing certain social links for a long time. Another way you can raise these social stats is by getting a job. That's right, you heard me. A job. One more time for the people in the back. A J-O-B. Let me chill. There's a variety of jobs you can pick from in this game. You can do small stuff like make money from origami cranes and writing stuff, to working at a daycare or be a janitor at a hospital, all of which were the ones that I ended up picking. Not only does all this stuff improve your social stats, but you can even start new social links from them. Both of the school club social links that I chose, I ended up maxing them out. I also ended up maxing out the hospital job ones, so there is a bright side to all of this. Anyways though, the next rescue mission involves us saving this guy named Kanji. Now Kanji is another interesting character. His whole thing is that he comes off as this tough and hard-boiled guy, but really it's just a facade to hide his true interests. And he's really into things that are perceived as more feminine. So he may seem rough on the outside, but in reality, deep down, he's just a softie. And honestly, out of the main group, he's one of my favorites. And he also had a really good social link. Another important character we get introduced to is Naoto. Naoto is a young detective working with the police on this case. She becomes a lot more important later on, but I'm mentioning her here because this is her first appearance. Once Kanji goes missing, the group gets together at Junes, the local department store. Now as for his dungeon, it wasn't too much of a problem for me, since I had gotten a lot more familiar with the game since Yukiko's dungeon. Also, I must say, Shadow Kanji was such a goofy character, genuinely the most entertaining Shadow. Anyways, I beat the boss first try and Kanji joins the team. Now after each dungeon, the group gets together at Junes to try and connect the dots as to who the killer may be, as well as their motives. And usually each mission brings in something to completely throw me as well as the characters off, which I must say overall this game did a very solid job at keeping me invested into the mystery. There were always twists and new information that would shift the story, so whenever we make actual progress on the case, it felt all the more rewarding. Before the next mission, I'd go ahead and do a few more social links, starting both Adachi's and Dojima's in the process. We also get one of the most memorable moments in the game, where we go to Okina City with Yosuke and Kanji, where all of us are trying to pull girls, but we all fail miserably. And at the end, we get one of the funniest moments in the game, being this. Wait! Oh, and last but not least, we get our first real major group event in the game, this being the camping trip. We get to spend more time with the main cast and get some funny moments as well, like Yukiko and Chie making an attempt on our lives with their horrible cooking. On to the third rescue mission now. It involves us saving this girl named Rise. Before moving to Inaba, Rise was a very huge and well-known model, and now she wants to try and go back to living a more normal life. But parts of her celebrity life keep interfering, and we see more of this in her social link. And yes, I did pick her as my romantic option. Listen, she made it clear that she wanted me out the gate, and unlike some other people, she can actually cook. From that point on, I knew that she was the one. For Rise's dungeon, it also wasn't too difficult, and I can definitely say the same thing for her boss fight. The fight was very easy, almost too easy. I had a weird feeling that something wasn't right, and that suspicion definitely held up because immediately after we fight against Shadow Teddy, this boss was a lot more of a challenge, and I'm not gonna lie, I got cooked on the first attempt, but my second try ended up being a success. After the fight, Teddy ends up getting his own persona persona, and Rise takes his spot as the navigator. After this, nothing major really happens aside from Teddy getting his human form, and now he works at Junes and is able to stay in the main world. Another major thing that happens though is the murder of our homeroom teacher, Mr. Morioka, and this leads us to our next rescue mission, being to save this guy named Mitsuo. If I'm being real, I shouldn't say rescue mission since the main characters currently think he's behind all the murders and kidnappings, and once we get back we have to turn him in, but whatever. His whole dungeon was a bit of a nuisance since you need this orb to actually get into the boss room, so I had to go back down a couple floors in order to get it. And once I eventually did that, I encountered the most annoying boss in the game, Shadow Mitsuo. Oh my god. This was definitely the most time consuming boss in the game, at least up to this point. Its whole thing is that it basically wears this armored suit made of blocks, and you have to keep hitting it with physical attacks in order to break it. Eventually, once the armor breaks, you deal more damage. But after this is where the main problem comes in. Once you attack it a few times, the armor starts to rebuild, putting you back at square one. Now, granted, I did beat this boss first attempt, but I cannot say that this was the most enjoyable process in the game. Once we leave the dungeon, Mitsuo gets arrested, and the main group thinks that they finally caught the culprit and everything's fine, which it absolutely isn't. I know y'all see the length of this video. Anyways though, summer break arrives and this gives us another group event. In this one, the characters go to the beach and we get some funny moments here. Not too long after this though, we get another event. This time it's another school trip and we go to this place called Tatsumi Port Island. Now, I didn't think too much of this place when I first played. Come to find out though that this is literally the same place from Persona 3. So as I've been playing Persona 3, I'm recognizing all the places and I'm like, yo, that was in Persona 4, holy shit. Back to the game though, my favorite moment from this trip has definitely got to be the club escapade stuff. Partially because I saw this part in the anime and it was a lot funnier. Like, it was already funny in the game, but the anime added a lot more to it. After the trip, the characters go back home and everything seems to be going fine until Naoto ends up in the TV. Yeah, like I said, we got a long way to go until this mystery solved. Oh, and not to mention the Mitsuo stuff had nothing to do with the actual case, and it was apparently just a copycat murder. All bro really wanted was some attention. Onto Naoto's dungeon though, I can't lie, it's definitely one of the more interesting ones in the game. Instead of going up like the rest of the dungeons, this one goes down instead. You've also got some really solid music here. However, next to Shadow Rise, Shadow Naoto was probably the easiest boss for me. After this, Naoto officially joins the group and also becomes the team bench warmer. Yeah, I failed to really utilize her in my playthrough. Not only did I fail to level her up that much, but she's also the only member of the main party whose social link I didn't get to start. And this was solely because I couldn't get my courage social stat up to where it needed to be in time. And this honestly sucked because I really like Naoto as a character. Once we save Naoto, a few major things happen. The first one being the school culture festival. Another group event with some funny moments, specifically the pageant part where the guys have to cross dress. There's just some really good and funny dialogue here. Another major thing is that I finally maxed out my first social link, being the basketball team. And last but not least, we get the setup to our final rescue mission. But this time, it's Nanako. And from this point on, the story really starts to shift, as it relates to the murder case at least. The lead up to this was executed really well. Basically, we get a letter from the supposed culprit, which is actually the second one we've received. I forgot to mention we got one earlier. Though this time, however, Dojima sees it. Also, I haven't really mentioned it yet, but Dojima already had his suspicions about us and our involvement in the case. He wasn't certain what the connection was, but once he saw this letter, he immediately takes us to the police station. Here, him and Adachi interrogate us about the case. Once they leave us in the interrogation room though, we turn on the TV and go to the Midnight Channel, only to see that Nanako's on there. This sends everyone into a panic and the characters meet up at the police station. Dojima makes the drastic, though understandable decision to go out and look for her on his own, though this causes him to get into a car accident, resulting in him being hospitalized. Now, we do get a suspect in the case, being a man named Namatame, who was the first victim's husband and was actually suspected before, and currently we think that he's in the TV with Nanako. The next day, the group meets up at Junes, go in the TV and find Nanako's location, and head on to the next and presumably the last dungeon. It is now time to save Nanako. The Heaven Dungeon has genuinely got to be my favorite. Everything from the design being this ethereal and divine, almost otherworldly setting, accompanied with the use of fog, adds to the mystique of this place, and it makes everything feel so faint yet so colorful. I personally think Atlas managed to capture this Heaven vibe perfectly. The tension and build-up before going to this dungeon made it all the more memorable for me. It helped give it this feeling of finality, like we're finally about to get to the bottom of this mystery that we've been waiting to get answers to for so long. And of course, the cherry on top of all of this has to be the music, which honestly, I'ma just let it speak for itself. Eventually, I'd make it to the top of this dungeon and go through the gates. And here we see the lead suspect of the case, Namatame, holding Nanako captive. While we talk back and forth with him, it becomes more and more clear that it seems like he's being controlled by something. He kept talking about voices from the TV and repeatedly saying that he was trying to save Nanako. This leads to him transforming into our next boss, Kunino Sagiri. Now, up to this point, this was probably the hardest boss so far. I lost the first time and won the second time just barely. My SP was pretty much down the drain by the end of the fight. Afterwards, we leave the TV world and Nanako has to stay in the hospital, and Namatame is under police custody. If I'm being honest, overall, I think that this was my favorite rescue mission. I mean, I already talked about the build-up in the dungeon itself, but here you could really tell that the story is getting closer to its climax. And little did I know that things were about to get even better in this game. Around the end of the same month the Nanako rescue mission takes place, Inaba slowly starts to get shrouded in this long-lasting thick fog. It doesn't seem like too much of a worry at first, but as time goes on, it becomes noticeably thicker each passing day. And it seems that people are actually getting sick from it. At first, I thought it may have just been some sort of mass hysteria and that the people in the town were just overreacting, but people actually end up getting hospitalized from it. Even students from our class start leaving and getting sick. Just to further enforce how strange and ominous this situation seems to be, this is the music that plays every time you go outside. Literally sounds like something straight out of Silent Hill. This is a complete contrast to the colorful and vibey music we would get before. Now it's all ambient and unsettling. Even visually, Inaba looks different. All of the colors are gone and instead it's replaced with this thick yellow haze. The characters eventually try putting on their glasses to see if there's any difference. And to their surprise, they can actually see clearly with them on, which could only mean one thing. The fog from the TV world is starting to leak into the real world. We then go to the hospital to check on Dojima and Nanako, and here it's revealed that Nanako has passed. Which, I mean, spoilers, she isn't actually dead, but at the moment it was pretty shocking and unexpected. Seeing everyone just break down was a pretty emotional moment, along with the sudden disappearance of Teddy. Also, apparently Namatame was transferred to this exact hospital, so that's just great. I'm sure Dojima will react perfectly fine to this information. Now, there was one part of this whole hospital sequence that kind of threw me off and definitely raised my suspicion, and it was with Adachi. Up to this point, Adachi had been a pretty normal side character, with nothing really too suspicious, but I can't lie, throughout this whole hospital sequence, Adachi was tripping. His behavior seemed sort of off and he was kind of downplaying the whole situation, it seemed like, and it made him look kind of suspicious. After this, I definitely knew I had to keep my eyes on him. Anyways, we sneak our way into Namatame's hospital room and we see him curled up on the floor next to the TV. This entire sequence is probably the most pivotal in the whole game up to this point, so much so that the game gave me a warning right before. Here the game sort of tests us. Some of the members in our group like Kanji and Yosuke think that we should just shove him into the TV and get our revenge, while everyone else is a lot more hesitant on the idea since there's still a lot we don't know about the case, and also cause that would involve us ending his life. Now, depending on the responses you give, it can result in 3 different things, 2 of which being a couple of the different multiple endings of the game. The first one is to just shove Namatame into the TV, and the other is to completely give up. Both of these will result in the player getting the true bad ending, and I gotta say, after watching the bad ending, you just get a sense of emptiness. It fast forwards to the day that Narukami leaves Inaba, with nothing being fully solved, Nanako still being supposedly dead, and the fog still there, along with the atmosphere just being filled with despair as Narukami boards the train. And you can really just see the dread on everyone's faces. It's honestly just a straight up depressing conclusion. Thankfully, I didn't go with either of those routes. Instead, I went with calming everyone down and thinking more rationally about the situation, opting out of the idea of pushing him into the TV. The next day, we head back to the hospital to confront Namatame in a much more rational and logical way. He also seems a lot more stable than he did the night before. And here, we finally get the confirmation that he isn't actually the culprit. Well, kinda. You see, while he was the one who put everyone into the TV, he wasn't the one who murdered the first 2 victims. And the reason why he put everyone into the TV was to prevent them from being the next victims. Which is why he kept saying he was trying to save Nanako back in the Heaven Dungeon. Meaning that the case shifts yet again, and seemingly is at a dead end. But not for long though. Because after this, we get the group together to discuss the case and connect the dots. We then step outside and talk to Naoto, and the game gives us the option to pick someone who you think is the culprit. This includes includes a wide array of characters, from our team members to classmates and other characters we've had social links with. Pretty much everyone is listed here, even Nanako, who is 100% clear of even being suspected. We can also clear Dojima and everyone else on the team and all of our school and job social links, as well as the victims of the murder, cause what sense would that even make? We can clear Mitsuo because while he did kill Morioka, we know that that wasn't related to the actual case, and was instead a copycat murder. And now there are really only two other names that really stand out. The first one being Namatame, who we already talked to and are aware of his involvement in the case, so I went ahead and cleared his name as well. The only other name that really stood out was Adachi. Adachi hadn't really shown any signs of being the perpetrator, nor did he really seem that suspicious for most of the game, all the way up until the hospital scene. I already mentioned that I thought his behavior was pretty strange throughout that whole portion, and it had made me very suspicious of him. But there was another thing that I had missed beforehand. During the part where we go to the scene of Dojima's car accident, Adachi had said something that Naoto caught on to, and she had been suspicious of him as well. Once we go back in and tell everyone else, Yukiko tells us that she saw Adachi with the announcer on the night of her death. He had apparently been assigned to guard her while she was at the inn, which if she could remember this all along, I'm not sure why she didn't bring this up earlier. But anyways, this part gives us 3 more possible outcomes. For me, I picked Adachi as the culprit and told everyone else about it, though if you can't choose the right culprit, the game will give you the bad ending. But the third option is picking Adachi as the culprit and not telling anyone else about it. This here will result in the accomplice ending. Here you team up with Adachi and even burn up some of the evidence of the case, and Namatame ends up being the one to go to jail. Now this ending was completely exclusive to Golden and wasn't in the original game. Comparing this to the bad ending, I think that this one's better overall. Back to the playthrough though, we go back to the hospital the next day to confront Adachi, and instead of confirming it, he tries to deny it and then runs off, making him look even more suspicious. Oh, I also forgot to mention that Teddy makes his return, and it gets revealed that he's actually been a shadow this whole time. Although unlike all the other shadows we've encountered, he has sentience and has become self-aware. Honestly, I can't lie, Teddy got some pretty great growth here and made me like him a lot more, though he does go back to his old ways after all of this. The next day we go into the TV to see if Adachi has escaped there. The group eventually locates him, and he seems to be in the room that we were in the first time we ever went through the TV. Here is where he spills all the info about the murders and how he killed both of the victims, showing absolutely zero remorse about what he's done. What I really love about his dialogue here is just how much you can feel his whole demeanor change. His tone for most of the game had been pretty casual and a lot more calm, but now it's a lot more intense and malicious. You can just feel the aggression in each of his sentences, and his facial expressions really help add to that. He then opens up the gate to the final dungeon, though we won't be heading there until December 22nd. Till then, I prepared and did more social links, maxing out both Yukiko's and Yosuke's in the process. Once the day arrived, I went in and entered the final dungeon, Magatsu Inaba. This dungeon was a bit different from the other ones. The enemies were harder and there were a lot more puzzles in this one. It would take a while, but I'd finally make it to the top. And once I got there, I'd see Adachi. He gives this whole speech about how much he hates the world and wants to get rid of it, and he really just wants to see it crash and burn. And honestly, I think this makes me like him as a villain even more. It's kind of rare to see antagonists be evil just for the sake of being evil, and it's even rarer to see one being executed in the right way, which I think Adachi definitely was. This guy doesn't get any backstory or anything to really sympathize with him on. He's just revealed to be a straight up psychopath. Another thing about him is that he has a lot of parallels and contrasts with Narukami. He's sort of like this darker reflection of him. If Narukami never made any bonds with others or got to understand people more and just stayed isolated and cold, then he probably would have gone down the same route as Adachi. And all of this together is what made him such a memorable antagonist for me. Onto the boss fight, he wasn't too much of a challenge. He uses a persona called Magatsu Izanagi, which is basically like an evil version of Narukami's main persona. I'd go ahead and take him down, hardly losing any HP or SP. And at that point, I knew there definitely had to have been a second phase to this fight, because there's no way I just beat the main antagonist that easily. And boy was I right, because after this, something seemingly takes over Adachi's body, an entity named Amino Sagiri. It gives a speech further reinstating the stuff Adachi said, though in a much different way, and it's a lot more sinister. Once it stops talking, it disappears and a bunch of fog starts to come in, and something slowly starts to emerge. This here is the true boss of this dungeon, the true form of Amino Sagiri. And not gonna lie, I was very nervous about this fight, and for all of the right reasons. For one, Amino Sagiri can use any element, whether it be fire, ice, wind, whatever. It also has a devastating attack called Nebula Oculus, which does a ton of damage. So yeah, this battle was not easy. Though with that being said, it wasn't impossible. Once you get the hang of its attack patterns, it becomes a lot easier. I went into this battle with Yukiko, Yosuke, and Kanji. Kanji because he's a tank, Yukiko for healing, and Yosuke for some extra damage. And it worked out very well, resulting in me defeating the boss on my first try. After this, Amino Sagiri disappears and the fog gets lifted, and we head back to the real world with Adachi, and guess who's going to jail? The team then celebrates by going to Dojima's place and making a cake. Oh, speaking of which, Dojima and Nanako got out of the hospital already, and I unfortunately didn't max out Risei's social link in time, so I didn't get to do the Christmas Eve event. But pretty much from this point on, there wasn't much else to do in the game. Aside from finishing up some social links, there's the New Year's Eve cutscene, which was pretty wholesome, and then the ski trip a little later on. But after that, the game ends with me getting the good ending, concluding my first playthrough of a Persona game. Is what I would say if that was really the end. You see, there are actually two more dungeons in the game. The first one being the Hollow Forest. This one focuses on Marie, whose character had been a mystery up to this point, aside from a few clues and hints during her social link. And in order to access this dungeon, you need to max out her social link, which someone forgot to do. But I was able to do the second one, which is the true final dungeon of the game. For this one, during your last day in Inaba, after you've talked to everyone whose social link you've maxed out, you need to head back to Junes and gather everyone there. Here they discuss and reminisce on things, and they realize and question one thing: how did Adachi know about the Midnight Channel? Basically, to make a long story short, y'all remember that gas station worker from all the way at the beginning of the game? Yeah, she reveals herself as the being known as Izanami and the true final boss, and her dungeon was actually foreshadowed early on into the game. Now I'd go ahead, make my way through the dungeon, and fight against her, which I've got to say, next to Heaven, this is probably my favorite dungeon design, especially when you get to the top floor. Anyways though, onto the boss itself, yeah, I've got to say this was definitely the hardest boss in the game. There's 3 different phases of this fight. The first one was pretty easy, I didn't really have much trouble with it, but the second phase when she transforms is the real challenge, because the game goes straight into the fight and its attacks deal so much damage. This phase actually ends with the group losing, but the third phase involves Narukami going up against it one-on-one, and the game even gives you a new persona to fight against the boss, whose attacks will no longer work on you. Once you defeat her, the fog in the shadow world gets completely lifted, revealing a much more calm and peaceful place, a location that looks similar to our world. Once this is over, we get the normal good ending. Though, if you were able to do this dungeon as well as the Hollow Forest dungeon, you'd get an extra cutscene where Narukami revisits Inaba. We get a wholesome moment where everyone reunites at Dojima's house, and the game finally ends with the characters taking a group photo together, giving us the true good ending to the game. And that, everyone, was my first experience with Persona 4. And like I said at the beginning of the video, it has ended up being one of my personal favorite games. I got so invested into the story and its characters to the point where once I got closer to finishing the game, I didn't want the journey to end. And now that I'm almost done with Persona 3 at the time of this recording, I'm starting to feel the same way with that. Everything I've consumed from this franchise has been great, and I'm glad that I made the decision to finally get into these games. If you're watching and haven't played Persona 4, unless you're waiting for the remake, I'd highly recommend playing Golden. I can guarantee that your playthrough isn't going to be the exact same as my playthrough. There's so many things that you can do in this game that I didn't even go into full detail with, like all the possible personas you can fuse, all the various social links you can complete, or even doing quests for the fox at the shrine, etc, etc. Hell, you can even battle against Margaret. This game is truly loaded with content, and it really makes me excited to see what they're going to do in the remake. I walked into Persona 4 completely blind, not knowing what I was doing for most of the beginning of the game, and even struggled in a few areas. Yet I enjoyed playing this game much more than I expected, and not only has this first playthrough solidified itself as an unforgettable experience, but a truly golden one. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. And I've got to say, I did not expect it to be this long in the slightest. I started working on this video in June and expected it to come out that month, but then I pushed it back further to July, and now it's August. So if you made it this far into the video and you enjoyed, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It would mean a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.